I jumped out of bed with a head that felt like it was about to explode. When I got to the bathroom, I quickly drank 2 aspirin pills. My stomach seemed to rebel, and I hung on the toilet for about 10 minutes. During that time, everything came back to me. My name is Ron Jameson, and when I got home from work yesterday, my loving wife Chrissy blindsided me. She started to tell me she loved me, but then explained that she had been seeing another man for a year and was in love with him too. She explained it as a simple act of caring. A man, whose name she refused to give, had been in a terrible car accident, and his wife had been killed and he had been left without a scratch. He felt terribly guilty about it. Chrissy explained that in the beginning, she was just trying to help him deal with his heartache, and then they fell in love. And yes, she admitted that they had sex. Chrissy even admitted that sometimes the sex was really good. Of course, throughout this whole nightmare conversation she insisted that she loved me and would eventually come back to me. But as long as this man needed her, she would be there for him. She assured me that she would be there for our children and me. The man was considerably younger than her, and she knew he would eventually leave. But no matter how long he needed her, she wanted to be there for him. It was the worst kind of nightmare a married man can have. Stunned, I did what almost any man would do. I accused my wife of being a slut and a whore. At this point, Chrissy unleashed all of her anger on me. She said she was completely disappointed in my reaction. Chrissy had the courage to tell me that if I really loved her, I would have accepted the situation. She told me that in our wedding vows I had promised to love, honor, and cherish her. It was clear that Chrissy was disappointed and angry with me. I was beyond furious and, to keep from hitting her, I started drinking and yelling. When I calmed down a bit, I asked her how she would feel about me finding another woman. Chrissy replied that who would want me? According to her, I was an obese middle-aged man with thinning hair. She also warned me that if I tried to divorce her, she would ruin me. I was beyond furious and completely unaware of what I could or should be doing at that moment. My brain was in complete disorder. I couldn't make sense of anything logically. It probably wasn't my finest moment, but I continued to drink and be angry with Chrissy. She packed a bag and announced that she was leaving and would go to her lover until I calmed down and accepted the situation. I don't remember much after that. Sitting on my bed, our bed, I decided to take stock. Chrissy was right, I was middle-aged, and my hair was thinning. And I had to admit that I was also about 20 pounds overweight. There was nothing I could do about my middle age, but I knew I could do something about my hair and my weight. But before I could do anything, I had to figure out where my kids were. It was a Saturday morning, so they should be home. A quick search around the house revealed that they weren't. So where the hell had Chrissy hidden them? I was about to call her parents when I heard a car pull up in the driveway. When I looked out the window, it was Chrissy's car. I saw our kids get out of the car and head towards the house. I met Chrissy at the front door. "Good, I can see you're sober," she said with reproach in her voice. "Where were the kids?" I asked in a breaking voice. "They were with me." "I couldn't leave the children with you." "You didn't take them to that bastard's house, did you?" hissed I. "Ron, watch your mouth," she snapped again. "They were already there," she said as if it was perfectly natural. "My friend is a remarkably kind man. You, on the other hand, behaved outrageously last night. I wouldn't dare leave them with you." "Fair point about me," I admitted. "But why didn't you take the kids to your parents?" "They weren't home," Chrissy said as she walked past me and went upstairs. I followed her into our bedroom. "Are you staying here or are you going to run off to your lover?" "Oh please Ron, stop acting so childish. I told you how it's going to be. I have no intention of arguing with you about it. The discussion is over. Whether you accept it or not is your choice. Even if you act like an ass, I still love you. And like I told you before, when he doesn't need me anymore, I'll be back full time. So, what do we do now?" I tried to remain calm. "I'm going to pack now, because I'm going to spend a few days with my friend until you finally cool down and accept the situation." "What about the kids?" I thought that would make her stay. But it didn't. If you don't want to look at them, call my parents, I'm sure they'll agree. Chrissy then packed another bag of clothes and left. At this point, my head was ready to explode. However, I knew I had to hold myself together for the sake of the children. But I wasn't going to accept Chrissy cheating on me. No self-respecting man would do that. When Chrissy left, I checked on the kids and asked if they had homework. All three of them said they did. I told them to get to work immediately. There was a lot of moaning and groaning until I informed them that when they were done, we would go to Daddy and Grandma's house. These are Chrissy's parents. The kids applauded. They loved going there because Daddy helped all three of my kids build go-karts. They worked on them non-stop for months. The go-karts had to be close to being finished. Chrissy's parents, Sam and Mary, lived on a small farm about 15 minutes from home. They were both retired, and Sam just loved to mess around. In addition to doing a little farming, he enjoyed building and repairing things. He had a very large workshop that he used for all his projects, and that's where they worked on the carts. When time allowed, I would help him out. I am a certified dealer mechanic at a local Ford dealership. It is the largest dealership in the Tri-County area. I wanted to talk to Chrissy's parents to see if they knew about her boyfriend and, more importantly, if they knew who he was. I also wanted their advice on what I should do. I've always had a great relationship with them. Since my parents lived 3 states away, I considered Sam and Mary my surrogate mother and father. However, I was a little apprehensive about them taking Chrissy's side in this whole thing. It would completely ruin our relationship. I went from room to room checking to see if the kids were doing their homework, and they were. It was then that it struck me how much my children were my pride and joy. Ron was the oldest, and he was 16. Only close family members called him Ron. We started calling him that so there would be no confusion as to whether Chrissy was referring to our son or to me. He was a pretty good soccer player, but not big enough to get a scholarship to college. Sally was a year younger and was a typical teenager. She liked to overstep her bounds, but was also an excellent student. Kyle, a toddler, was only 11. He hated being called a toddler, but Chrissy did it anyway. Kyle was a happy accident. We weren't going to have kids when Chrissy discovered she was pregnant. But Kyle was such a happy baby that he was a pleasure to be around. While the kids were studying upstairs, I made myself a cup of coffee and started making a list. I had a lot to do, and I didn't know how much time I would have to do it. The first thing I did was call my boss, Bob Clarkson, and told him my problem. I had worked at the dealership since its inception 23 years ago. And Bob had been my boss for at least 15 years. To be honest, I was one of the best mechanics at the dealership. Bob listened to my tale of woe and was very sympathetic, as his son had gone through a difficult divorce the year before. He had become very, very unpleasant. It got to the point where his son's ex-wife, Carol, accused him of molesting their daughter. "Damn," I said. "That's one cold bitch." "Tell me about it," said Bob with evident bitterness. For a week things had been going our way. We expected the police to arrest Gary at any minute. Such accusations are devastating and almost impossible to refute. And the police get scared every time a woman starts pointing her finger at a man. The only thing that saved Gary was his former mother-in-law. When Carol told her mother that Gary had molested her granddaughter, I think she decided that would be the final nail in Gary's coffin. Everyone knows Bev is ruthless. But what I didn't realize was that she had a touch of justice in her. She immediately picked up her granddaughter from preschool and took her to the GP. Bev asked the doctor to examine her granddaughter to see if she had been molested. The doctor stated unequivocally that her granddaughter had never been molested. Armed with this information, Bev went to the police department and told them that if they pressed charges against Gary, she would testify against her daughter. Bev then told Carol that if she continued to act like this, she would tell the court about her drug problems and lose her daughter. "God bless you, Bev," I said, somewhat shocked that women were capable of doing such things to get their way. "Amen to that," Bob replied. "So if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know, Ron. If it's in my power to do it, I will." Since I had 12 personal days and 6 weeks of accrued vacation, I asked for the following week off. Bob readily agreed, and what's more, he said that if I needed to take all the personal days and vacation together, he would handle it. As it turned out, that's exactly what I did. You can help me with something else, I explained. I need the name of a good divorce lawyer, if you know one. It's simple, he said. Use the lawyer my son used. He ripped Carol off. Gary got primary custody of their daughter, can live in the house. And Carol has to pay child support. His name is Dwight Tucker. I think I have his number somewhere. The more complicated my son's divorce became, the more we communicated through lawyers, and it got to the point where I started hearing Mr. Tucker's name in my dreams. Bob took about a minute and finally found Dwight Tucker's card. After getting the number, I called the lawyer's office. I didn't expect anyone to be there on a Saturday, but I decided to leave a message. But I was in luck. Not only was Mr. Tucker there, but his secretary told me he had a canceled appointment. He would see me if I could be in the office in 30 minutes. I told the kids that I needed to be out for an hour or so and to behave themselves. Then I jumped in the car and made it to Mr. Tucker's office in 20 minutes. Dwight Tucker looked to be in his early 30s. He was a good-looking man a couple inches shorter than me. He had deep blue eyes and a very friendly smile. I had no doubt that Dwight was a big hit with the female jurors. What can I do for you today? Dwight asked, settling into a chair. My wife told me yesterday that she was cheating on me with a younger man, I said, feeling my face flush with embarrassment and anger. I summarized everything that had happened during the day. Dwight sat there taking notes and shaking his head. When I told him that my wife claimed she still loved me but was going to keep sleeping with this guy, he stopped me. Let me get this straight. Dwight's eyes darkened slightly. Your wife says she loves you, but she's going to keep fucking that poor lost soul? My face flushed hard with embarrassment. I just nodded. Okay, go ahead, Dwight said. I told her that Chrissy had gotten mad at me when I refused to go along with her plan. I also admitted that I had called her a slut and a slutty slut. Painfully, I explained that Chrissy laughed when I asked her how she would feel if I went and got a woman. It was very painful and embarrassing to admit how Chrissy belittled me as a man and told me that I could never find a woman who wanted me. Not only that, she promised that she would ruin me if I tried to divorce her. Did she really tell you all that? Asked Dwight in a voice full of disbelief. No offense, Mr. Fremont, but your wife is either one of the most heartless people in the world or she has serious mental problems. Nothing's taken, I sighed. I think so myself. Then I explained that yesterday, when we'd had our fight, she'd left the kids at her lover's house, and they'd spent the night there. Dwight looked up for a second and smiled. Then he lowered his head and wrote something. Okay, now for the $64,000 question. What do you want to do? Asked Dwight, raising his head and interlocking his fingers. I thought for a moment, and then answered, I can't live with the way things are now. I don't know if I can live through it. But I certainly don't want to be destroyed by divorce, and I don't want to lose my children. Dwight shook his head sympathetically. That seems to be the new mantra for women facing divorce because of their bad behavior. But rest assured, I will do my best to limit any damage it can do to you. If you divorce, you will receive at least 50% of your joint assets. I warn you that the courts don't care about infidelity. So I have to pay child support and alimony? I said, getting really upset. Despite Dwight's assurances, it felt like I was about to be outed. Yes, that's a possibility. But that's why we have to strike now and strike hard, Dwight said as he studied his notes. Right now, your wife has left your marital home. And to make matters worse, she has taken your children to her lover and left them unsupervised. In some courts, this is prohibited. You currently have custody of your children and I think we can keep it. I will try to get an emergency restraining order against your wife that will allow you to stay in the house at least temporarily. And the longer you stay, the stronger your case for primary custody will be. If we get that, you won't have to pay alimony. Does your wife work? Yeah, part-time at the hospital. Chrissy works shifts on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I replied, and then a thought struck me, which I voiced. That's probably where she met the underdog. Dwight agreed, and then asked how much she made. I explained that she made about $25,000 a year. I, on the other hand, made about $80,000. I have an important question to ask, and I want you to think hard about it, Dwight said, looking directly at me. Do you still love her? Do you want to try to patch things up? I lowered my head and stared at the floor for a long time. When I looked up, tears were streaming down my face. I nodded, but then added, I do love her, but I can't accept the situation as it is. If she doesn't want to break up with this guy, I want a divorce. One last question. Dwight flipped a sheet of paper in his notebook to reveal a blank one. As best you can, tell me what assets you have. I thought for a moment, mentally listing the assets we had. Then I explained that, at a rough estimate, we had about $3,500 in our checking account. We also had $44,000 in a savings account and a CD worth $20,000 plus interest. I also explained that I had about $150,000 in my 401k. Chrissy had a little less, saved in her retirement plan since she worked full-time at the hospital. Even though she hadn't worked as long as I had, I explained that the benefits package at the hospital was generally better than mine. However, oddly enough, my company offered a better healthcare plan. So we took advantage of it for the whole family. I thought for a moment, then mentioned that we had 2 cars registered in both of our names. We had a house, of course. However, this house was one we had bought only a few years ago, and the loan was maxed out. We didn't have a lot of equity. Okay, here's what I want you to do. Dwight looked like a man ready for battle. The first thing you need to do is withdraw half of what you have in savings, checking, and CDs. Then I want you to put that money in a separate account in your name only. I can't do anything with the disc because it's in both of our names, I explained. I can't cash it without Chrissy's signature. No problem, Dwight said as he started going over the numbers on the calculator. Withdraw $33,750 from the savings account. Then pay as many house bills as you can from the checking account. Cancel any joint credit cards you have and pay them off with the joint checking account. Then apply for a new credit card in your name only. I still have a credit card that I got before we were married, I said. However, I don't use it very often because our joint card gets charged back. Even better, Dwight smiled. You won't have to apply for a new card. Dwight quickly scribbled a list of instructions on a notepad and handed it to me. Right now I want you to go out to my secretary and tell her to call Taylor Locksmith for you. You will give them the address and ask them to change all the locks on your house. Then come back here and I'll tell you our next steps. Miss Carlson quickly called Taylor's locksmith. I gave them the address and was told they would arrive around noon. Then I went back to Dwight Tucker's office. Dwight was just on the phone when I sat down. We're in luck. According to the clerk, if I fax the paperwork today, we'll be assigned Judge Johnson. Why is it luck? I asked, embarrassed. He hates cheaters, Dwight replied with a smile. He's an old-fashioned Bible Belt judge and he hates spouses who cheat, whether male or female. Believe me, it works in our favor. If he hadn't been there, I probably would have had to dance around a little more, but I'm sure we would have gotten our way. However, Judge Johnson was a good friend of my father's. I know for a fact that he wouldn't be mad if I called him at home. At that moment, Dwight stood up and extended his hand to me. I shook it gratefully. Before you go home, Dwight instructed me, I want you to attend to your banking business. I'm going to prepare a motion for an emergency restraining order against your wife. She is prohibited from being in your home or within 500 feet of you or your children. She is currently living with her lover, and we know she has left your children with him. That should help a lot with the restraining order. Weeks or months later the restraining order can be lifted, but by then you should be firmly established in the family home as primary caregiver. I'll have the divorce papers to your wife by Friday. Then we'll have to sit back and see what your wife wants to do. For the first time since Chrissy had planted her little bomb on me, I felt like I had my life and some of my dignity back. The bank wasn't crowded, so I was able to quickly get a cashier's check for my portion of the money and close our only shared credit card. I was told it had a balance of $537. I paid off the balance from the checking account. I then paid off the mortgage 2 months in advance. That took another $2,600. There wasn't much left in the checking account. With the cashier's check in hand, I went next door to another bank and opened a checking and savings account in my name only. Having finished with that, I went home. When I reached home, it turned out that the children were watching TV, so I loaded them into the car. As I drove up to my in-laws' house, I saw Sam coming around the corner from his workshop. He waved at me and headed back toward the house. The kids got out of the car and followed their grandfather. Once inside, Mary greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. A minute later, Sam came in and, after washing his hands, came out tea. "Oh, greet me. I'm sorry I have to tell you this," I immediately apologized. "It's hard for me to say it." I took a deep breath and continued. "Chrissy is having an affair and I'm filing for divorce." "I don't believe you," Sam said sharply. "Chrissy is not that kind of woman. What proof do you have?" "She told me," I said quietly as tears began to roll down my face. At that moment, the back door opened and the children ran into the house. "Please stay outside for a few minutes," I said to the children. "Why?" asked Ron. "Because I'm telling you," I said sharper than I meant to. At that moment, Ron saw the tears on my face and immediately turned around, pushing his siblings back out the door. "Did she tell you?" asked Mary incredulously. "Yes," I said firmly, "and a lot more." I then retold the story of the previous evening, including the part where she had sex and it was good. I also told them about how she told me that if I divorced her she would ruin me. Lastly, I told about how she thinks no other woman would want me. They were shocked and Sam was angry. "I still don't believe it. I'm going to call her and put her on speakerphone." Dialing his daughter's number and putting it on speaker, Sam placed the phone on the coffee table. "Hi, Daddy," Chrissy replied cheerfully. "What can I do for you?" "Ron's here now," Sam said and immediately asked a question. "Are you two having an affair?" There was a long pause. Then Chrissy demanded, "What did he say?" "He said you made love to another man and that you were in love with this guy." "It's complicated, Daddy," she pleaded. "I'm trying to help this man. He's been through a terrible tragedy, and I'm trying to help him." Sam's face turned bright red, and through clenched teeth he asked, "Are you fucking him or not?" "We had sex, but I still love Ron. I just can't leave that man right now. I love him too." I was completely stunned by Chrissy's dad. She had always been a daddy's girl, and I assumed Sam would make excuses for her. "Chrissy," Sam's voice was a little strangled, "I never thought my daughter would ever become a goddamn whore." "Daddy, please," was all that was heard when Sam hit the off button. After a minute or two, the phone rang again, and Mary went to answer it. "Leave him alone," Sam ordered. But Mary grabbed the phone anyway and tried to answer it. Sam snatched the phone out of her hands and threw it into the fireplace. I said, "Leave it alone." He shouted at his wife. She was completely shocked by her husband's anger and stepped back. I was shocked even more. Dead silence filled the room as Sam and Mary tried to make sense of what they had just learned. Finally, Sam came over to me and hugged me. "Ron, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. I can't believe our daughter would do this to you. Anything we can do to help you, we will. I mean anything. We'll be there for you and the kids. I'll have Mary talk to our daughter later and let you know how it goes. Right now I'm too angry to talk to her." After that, I had to leave in time to get back to the locksmith's house. After getting the kids in the car, I hugged Sam and Mary and invited them to dinner where we could talk more about my problem. On the way home, Sally burst into tears. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" "Where did you hear that?" demanded I. "From me," Ron said defiantly. I snuck into the house and listened. I realized it was something bad. But I didn't think it would be like this. I sighed and realized that they had a right to know what was going on. But then there was the question of how to tell the children about their mother without hurting them too much. Damn Chrissy, her selfishness is the reason the kids are suffering. I bet she never thought about that when she climbed into bed with her new man. Unfortunately, it looks like your mom and I are getting a divorce, I said softly. But why? Asked Kyle, starting to cry. Your mother has fallen in love with another man, I said simply. You mean she's making love to another man, said Sally between tears. I hate her. She's a total bitch. Sally, don't talk about your mother like that, I admonished my daughter, but my words were hollow, as that was exactly how I was feeling right now. The locks were changed, and not a moment too soon. 10 minutes after the locksmith van left, Chrissy came rumbling into the driveway. You had to fucking tell my parents, didn't you? I'm sure you told them I was a slut and a whore, Chrissy yelled. I thought you loved me? Chrissy, I said sadly, I really do love you with all my heart, but I'll never put up with you fucking some other guy. And you have no idea how much you hurt me when you told me I was just an ugly middle-aged guy that no woman would want to be with. You basically told me you were doing me a favor by staying with me. I can do without your pity, love. Not only did you do that, but you threatened to destroy me. And yet you dare to say you love me. You need to think about yourself, Chrissy. People who love each other don't do that. As for telling your parents, I continued, if you're so convinced of the rightness of your actions, it doesn't matter what your parents know. Chrissy looked shocked after I blasted her with my accusations. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say those things, she tried to apologize. I just got angry at the time because you called me a slut and a whore. Truly, Ron, calling your wife and the mother of your children those names. You promised to love, honor and cherish me. Shame on you. If you really loved me, you would have accepted the situation. I'm not leaving you for him, it's just that I love him too and I'm trying to help him. He's much younger than me and will move on with his life in time. Chrissy, I said, shaking my head slowly. If you're going to recite our wedding vows, you should include the part where you promised to leave everyone else behind. Chrissy blushed and looked uncertain at that moment. Then her eyes narrowed, and the arrogance returned. She was breathing heavily, and I realized she was trying to come up with the next argument for why I should accept the situation. At that moment, I wished to God that I had no love for her at all. But I still loved her deeply. Listen, Ron, Chrissy said in the tone she used with her children when she wanted them to behave, stop being an ass. I'm your wife. You know me. I love you, and I'll come back to you when that man is well again. I was so sad at that moment that I wanted to curl up in a ball and cry. But I pulled myself together and shook my head. No, Chrissy, I don't know you. My wife was a warm and loving person who would never cheat on me. You are a person I don't know. As far as I know, this is just one of your many affairs over the years. I can't be sure of anything else. Chrissy's eyes narrowed and her face reddened. I could tell at this point she was furious and ready to explode. This is not an affair, and this is the first person I've had sexual intercourse with since we got married. This man has been hurt badly and I'm going to help him whether you agree or not. Well, just in case you're not sure how I feel, I said as my insides turned to ice, I'm not accepting this. Not only that, but since I don't trust anything about you anymore, I intend to do a DNA test on the kids to make sure they're really mine. You're just a fucking asshole, Chrissy hissed. I can see that you intend to turn this into something very ugly. Just remember what I told you would happen if you tried to divorce me. Looking down at my wife from the porch, I shook my head. I was little consoled by the fact that she had no idea of the shitstorm that was likely to rain down on her. I guess she had convinced herself that she could have her cake and eat it too and there would be no repercussions. At that time, the sheriff's car pulled up. The deputy got out of the car and walked over to Chrissy. Are you Chrissy Jameson? The deputy asked. Yes, I am, Chrissy replied embarrassed. Ma'am, this is a restraining order. The deputy held out the court order to her. It states that you may not enter this house and must stay 500 feet away from it. Do you understand? But this is my house, Chrissy hissed. All my stuff is inside. Ma'am, I'll give you 15 minutes in the house to gather your things. The deputy looked at me and I nodded. Mr. Jameson will stay here. Officer, I'd prefer to walk the kids in the backyard, if that's okay with you? I asked. But I want to see my children. Chrissy was beyond furious. Ma'am, the deputy began nervously, realizing the situation was about to get out of his control. The reason for the restraining order is to protect your children from you. Chrissy turned around with anger in her eyes. You did this. You're trying to take my children away from me. No, Chrissy, you did it, I said calmly. I simply informed the court that you left our home and left our children unattended at your lover's house where you made love to him. I didn't leave our house, and he's a wonderful man, shouted Chrissy. He's just someone I'm trying to help. By sleeping with him, I answered more for the deputy than for my wife. I took the kids to the backyard and told them that their mother was packing to take them to her new man's house, but I would let them see her before she left. I didn't get any enjoyment out of seeing Chrissy with the kids. Kyle cried very hard when I took them back outside. He threw himself into his mother's arms and cried bitterly, begging her not to leave. Please, Ron, Chrissy sobbed. Don't you see what you're doing to the children? Anger flared up in me, but I suppressed it and told her with an icy calmness in my voice, I didn't do anything to the children. This is all on your conscience. If you want to put an end to this, dump that asshole and come home. Ron, why can't you understand that I can't leave him, ch? Rissy said through streams of tears. Chrissy, I'm sure you thought long and hard before we had that shitty conversation yesterday, I said sadly. But in all your thinking, I don't think you thought about the consequences of your decision. Now you're starting to see those consequences. I hope you're happy. Ron just stood there looking at his mother and then asked why. Chrissy faltered, trying to explain what she was doing to her son. Ron listened, but it was clear he didn't believe anything. And yet it was Sally who had let her mother off the hook. You're just a selfish bitch, she said, spitting in her mother's face. I had to grab my daughter because I thought she might hit Chrissy. I also demanded that she apologize. Sally flatly refused. Chrissy was completely stunned and fell to the ground sobbing. I was not completely shocked by my daughter's behavior. Sally and Chrissy had been going through a rough patch lately and seemed to be confronting each other more and more often. To me, it was the usual teenage rebellion that I thought Sally would outgrow. But now I could only hope that Chrissy hadn't ruined her relationship with her daughter permanently. While I was holding Sally, Chrissy got up and ran to her car. As she drove away, I could see her pounding furiously on the steering wheel. Kyle tried to run after the car, screaming, Mommy, please don't leave us. Ron finally caught him and brought him back. The deputy looked at me sadly. Mr. Jameson, I'm sorry you had to go through that. That night Sam and Mary came over for dinner. I was going to make grilled hamburgers and salad. But Mary chased me out of the kitchen and made meatloaf and her world-famous macaroni and cheese. The kids loved it. While Mary cooked, Sam and I sat in the living room and drank beer. I could see that he was very upset about what his daughter was doing. I explained to him about the restraining order and that I had gotten it because Chrissy had left the children unattended with her lover. This upset Sam even more. Mary talked to Chrissy about an hour after you left, Sam finally said. How did it go? I asked hopefully. Terrible, Sam admitted. Mary tried unsuccessfully to reason with Chrissy. Chrissy is convinced she's right and we're all wrong. She thinks we're horrible people, and that's when Mary got angry, really angry. I'd never seen her so angry before. The conversation ended with Mary telling her daughter not to call us anymore. Mary also told Chrissy that if the case went to trial, she would testify against her. As you might expect, dinner was very low-key. The only bright spot was that Sam had invited the kids to go go-karting the next day. That at least brought smiles to Ron and Kyle's faces. Sally just sat there with an angry expression on her face. She hadn't eaten anything, but I decided to let it go. I guess she was hurting almost as much as I was. The following Friday at the hospital, Chrissy was served with divorce papers. I learned from friends who worked there that Chrissy was completely out of control. She was obviously very, very angry with me. She swore at the filing officer and swore she was going to destroy me. Eventually she was sent home, or rather, to her lover's house. Chrissy then hired her own lawyer. Her lawyer turned out to be a woman Dwight knew well, since he had run into her several times. Her name was Amber Wright, and Dwight said she wasn't as good as she looked. Amber immediately tried to get the injunction lifted. Judge Johnson showed no sympathy. He said the children were perfectly safe now and he would only modify the order. He told Chrissy that she could come to the house for supervised visits. But her boyfriend is not allowed within 500 feet of the house at any time. He warned her that if she violated this prohibition, he would revoke her visitation rights. Chrissy was thrilled with this change. As for me, I wasn't upset because I wanted the children to see their mother. However, Chrissy's joy was short-lived. The judge ordered Chrissy to start paying child support. And the amount he ordered meant she would have to go back to work full-time. Even after her explosion at the hospital, I knew they would hire her full-time. Nurses were always in short supply. Besides, she was a great nurse. Sometime after the hearing, the results of the DNA test came in the mail. It took me almost half a day to work up the courage to open the envelope. When I finally opened it and read the report, my heart was filled with pure happiness for the first time since this story began. My children were truly mine. I reread the report several times to convince myself that it did indeed confirm that I was the biological father of my children. Then I wondered what I would do if the report said that one or all of my children were not mine. In an instant, I realized that I would love them equally, no matter what. In that moment, I would have been willing to forgive anything if Chrissy had just left that bastard and come home. But she refused to do that. She had her feet on the ground. I used all my personal days and vacations to stay home with the kids. When they were over, thankfully Chrissy's parents agreed to watch them. Sam and Mary still refused to talk to their daughter until she came to her senses. Sam said she called 3 or 4 times a day for a week. Then Sam blocked her number. The visitation schedule was left up to Chrissy and me. What this really meant was that our attorneys would communicate what we wanted. In the end, it was decided that Chrissy would be able to visit us on Monday, Wednesday and Friday from 6 to 7 in the evening. Mary volunteered to look after her. However, I insisted on being present for the first visit. I wanted Chrissy and Mary to know exactly what the rules would be. On the first Monday, a car parked on the street and Chrissy got out of it. I didn't recognize the car, but I quickly realized that it must be her lover's car. Chrissy nervously walked up to the house and smiled uncertainly at both of us. "Hi Ron, how are you doing?" "Mom, it's good to see you." "Chrissy, you have to leave," I snapped back. "The judge told you that your lover is not allowed within 500 feet of this house." There was a look of horror on her face. But he was just giving me a ride." "Chrissy, have you lost your mind?" I was furious. The judge clearly said no lovers. "Tell that asshole to leave and I won't tell the judge." Chrissy nodded quickly and started walking back to the car. Just then a thought struck me. I stepped around the corner and pulled a pen out of my pocket. While Chrissy was talking to her lover, I wrote down the license plate number. Then I returned to the porch as the car drove away. "Okay," he said he'd come back and get me. Chrissy was now acting defiant. "Tell him to meet you outside, because I don't want him anywhere near the house." Chrissy's face filled with anger. "Ron, I'm tired of your attitude toward me. You didn't have to steal money from our checking account or cancel my credit card." "Chrissy, I didn't steal anything. The money withdrawn from the checking account went to pay off the credit card and then 2 mortgage payments. I wanted to make sure the kids had a place to live while we sorted out the situation. And as for canceling the credit card, I didn't want to be burdened with all the expenses you might incur while you're running around with your lover." Chrissy's face reddened, I assume with anger and arrogance. "This isn't an affair, and he's not my lover." "Ron, you're being an asshole." Before I could say anything, Mary stepped forward and slapped Chrissy across the face. I was as stunned as Chrissy. Chrissy stepped back and stared at her mother in bewilderment. "Chrissy, if you disrespect Ron one more time, I will rip the dress off you and smack your ass. Now if you want to see the kids, they're in the living room. I want to talk to Ron, and then I'll be there. But be warned, if you do or say anything wrong, I will throw you out of this house in a heartbeat." Chrissy nodded obediently and went into the house. "Ron, I apologize for my retarded daughter," Mary said sympathetically. "Thank you for sticking up for me," I said with sincere gratitude and walked away. 2 weeks after the first hearing, as Dwight mentioned, the restraining order was lifted. But by then I had already proven myself to be the primary caretaker, and I was allowed to stay in the house because Chrissy was still seeing her lover. Chrissy was still paying child support, but she was now able to visit the children in public places unsupervised. However, the judge warned her that she could not take them to her lover's house and he could not be with her when she had the children. After 4 months of delay, it was our first real day in court to finalize the divorce. Before either of our attorneys could say a word, Judge Johnson asked if Chrissy and I had attended any counseling sessions. Both attorneys admitted that we had not. Then the judge requested 8 sessions of marital counseling. Neither Chrissy nor I objected to these sessions. I thought they were a waste of time, but I didn't want to anger the judge. On the other hand, I couldn't escape the feeling that Chrissy still believed she could convince me, or perhaps the therapist, that she was doing the right thing. The first meeting with the therapist and Patterson turned out to be exactly what I had envisioned. Chrissy spent the better part of an hour trying to explain that what she was doing was the Christian thing to do. I thought the therapist was going to swallow her teeth when Chrissy first started explaining. I think it was Chrissy's arrogance that truly shocked Dan. In the second week, Anne began to probe Chrissy's arguments gently. She asked if she thought it was fair for me to go outside and make love to a woman. I flinched, expecting an attack on my masculinity. But this time she didn't succeed. Chrissy didn't answer right away, but I didn't care what she said. In the months that the divorce dragged on, I made some changes. I know it sounds vain, but when the woman you love tells you that you're not good enough, you're desperate to prove her wrong. So I made up my mind and had a hair transplant surgery. I didn't need much, but it still cost about $4,000. I was very hesitant to have this procedure done. I didn't know if I wanted to put up with the teasing. However, I was still using my vacation time, so I made up my mind. As far as I understood the procedure, my hair was cut, then the plugs were pulled out of the back of my head and inserted in the front. I hardly left the house for the first week. My kids didn't know what to do with me and asked tons of questions. I just told them it was a minor medical procedure. After about 10 days I looked the same as before, and each subsequent week my hair got longer and longer. After the procedure was almost healed, I started exercising. I also started running. At first I could only go half a mile before I thought my lungs would explode and my legs would give out. Eventually I got to the point where I could run 10 miles. I also joined a gym. I changed the lunch and dinner menus in our house so that we would all eat healthier. The kids grumbled at first because I gave up fast food, cookies, ice cream, pizza, and many other junk foods. However, I searched the internet and found some interesting meals to make. They loved it when I surprised them with something new and also tasty. Some of the dishes didn't turn out very tasty, but we laughed about it, threw them in the garbage and made sandwiches. As it turned out, my kids loved helping me in the kitchen. It has become a real family affair. Aside from the pain that was still burning in my heart because of Chrissy's betrayal, I was starting to feel better and better. On my first day back at work, I was truly energized. I walked into the office to see what they had planned for me, and the receptionist, Trudy, greeted my return with a strange look. I thought she was going to berate me for my new hairstyle, but she didn't. "Welcome back, Ron," she chirped, and then her eyes began to study me. "There's something different about you." I blushed slightly. "Oh, I've been on a diet. I lost 18 pounds. I want to lose another 5. She laughed and nodded. "Well, it suits you just fine. If I wasn't married, I'd be all over you. Thanks for the self-esteem boost, but according to my wife, I'm just a middle-aged man with no sex appeal." So much so that she found herself a lover. I tried to joke, but it came out badly. By now, everyone in the company knew of my plight. Storm clouds thickened over Trudy's eyes. "Chrissy is an idiot. Either that or she's out of her mind. You're a great guy, Ron, and there are plenty of women in the world who would be happy to have you. Don't let Chrissy get in your head. It was the best slap on the wrist I'd gotten in months. Suddenly, I didn't feel like a failure anymore. I was brought back to the present when and asked my wife again, Chrissy, how would you feel if Ron came home and told you he was sleeping with another woman? As I said, I was expecting Chrissy to infringe on my manhood, but she didn't. During our first meeting, I noticed how she had her eye on me. I guess she could no longer tell I was thinning hair and overweight. It was another boost to my ego. Anyway, I just sat in the chair and waited while Chrissy contemplated what to say. She couldn't say that I couldn't have another woman if she had another man. I think if he was trying to help this woman through some tragedy, she said arrogantly, I wouldn't mind. What if he tells you that he loves this woman and that the sex was really good? Again, I agree, Chrissy insisted. However, he will have to assure me that the children and I will be taken care of. The session continued in the same vein, and tried to make Chrissy realize that her situation was really ridiculous, but Chrissy refused to budge. Just as I feared, these sessions were just a waste of time. Chrissy was going to use them to convince me that she was right. That was never going to happen. Plus, the initial shock of what Chrissy was doing was starting to wear off. Funny thing about love. If you don't nurture it, it starts to die. By the third week, something had changed. Chrissy came to the sessions very reserved and didn't talk much. Mostly she just listened. Whatever had changed, it set Chrissy back a bit. Perhaps she wasn't so arrogant now because I calmly and sympathetically challenged all of her assumptions at every point. I also noticed that Chrissy was ogling me when she didn't think I would notice. I continued to exercise and lost a few more pounds. I even started doing a lot of yard work, which made me get a great tan. A couple months before the therapy sessions were booked, I had a life change. I became dissatisfied with my job. I loved fixing cars, and not just engines. I took great pleasure in doing body repairs. I had been fixing old cars since I was 14 years old. I knew how to do it all. Now I saw my own business as a means to spend more time with my children. I discussed it with Sam, and he agreed to help me. I wanted to open my own store and start building a business. But I couldn't just quit my job and do it. I didn't have the money to last until the business could support us. We would starve to death before I could start my business. But since Sam's farm was also in an industrial area, he agreed to let me start a business in his workshop. Actually, Sam's workshop was once a horse barn that he had converted. There was plenty of room for Sam and me. If I got the business going, Sam agreed to lease a piece of land by the road to build my own building. I spent time at work learning how they have everything set up. Basically, the dealership was set up for more work than I had anticipated. They did some body work at the dealership, but most of it was subcontracted out. With that in mind, I scaled back the number of tools and equipment I needed. One thing I knew for sure was that I would need to build a paint booth. Sam was not only okay with that, he helped me build it. I used the savings freed up from our joint savings, plus a small loan from Sam, to finance the venture. I started working part-time, mostly on weekends and evenings. It was fun and the kids often came to watch or even help. I really enjoyed teaching Ron how to do things. Even Sally got her hands dirty and loved to tell her girlfriends how she helped change the engine or paint the Corvette. It also made her more interesting to the boys at school. I was doing business by word of mouth, and soon wondered if I should go into business full-time. This decision came to mind when I was told I had to work over the weekend to finish some backlogged business. I couldn't do that because I had my own clients to take care of. I realized I was going to be fired when I came to tell Bob that I couldn't work because I had my own business to take care of. Got a minute, Bob? I asked, poking my head into his office. Sure thing, Ron, he waved his hand at me. I'm glad you're working this weekend. We've got 44 cars coming in this Friday that have been sold, and they need to be gone over from top to bottom. We should have them out by the end of the month. I cringed a little when he told me that. Most people don't realize that factories have special incentives for dealers. If they sell a certain number of cars per month, they get a discount off the invoice. For example, the factory might say, if you sell 300 cars this month, we'll take $150 off your cost. That's a savings of $45,000. That money is in the owner's pocket. But if the dealership only sells 299 cars, the dealership gets nothing. That was very important to the dealership. That's the thing, Bob, I said and immediately felt sweat running down my back. I can't work this weekend. I've kind of started running my business on the weekends, and I have things to finish up. I'm sorry, Ron, Bob said curtly, but if you can't work this weekend, I may have to let you go. I understand, Bob, I said meekly. I hope we have no hard feelings. I've been trying to set up my own business. I want to spend more time with the kids and make some money for their college. I'll clean out my locker. I'd hate to lose you, Ron, Bob said sadly. Tell me about your business. Where are you located and what kind of work do you do? I explained that I had started my own business on my father-in-law's property and told him what equipment and tools I had. In fact, I was ready to do almost any kind of car repair, including bodywork. Go get a cup of coffee and then come back here, Bob said, pulling out his cell phone. I didn't feel like drinking coffee, so I walked over to my locker and put all my stuff in a box. Losing my job meant I was going to have a rough time of it in the near future. The kids would have to be transferred to Chrissy's health insurance since I had taken it off mine. Still, I was confident I could handle it. I said no almost as much as I took. Bob invited me into his office when he saw me walking down the hall. I have a proposition for you, Ron, he said excitedly. If you work this weekend, we'll reimburse you for all the money you lose due to customer dissatisfaction. No, I shook my head, I can't do that to my clients, Bob. Hold your horses, I'm not done yet, Bob said, holding out a piece of paper across the table. It was a contract with an independent contractor. I really need you this weekend. I also think you can convince your customers to wait a few days. If you can do that, and your shop passes our inspection, we'll hire you as an independent contractor to do some body work. I was stunned, but agreed to the deal. After that weekend, I pretty much went about my business. Once in a while I would stop by the dealership if they had a problem, but I wasn't busy. In addition, Sam started helping me part-time and Mary agreed to do my bookkeeping. I was now making more money than I had ever made working at the dealership. The only thing still left in my life was my marriage. And after the fourth counseling session, I wanted to end it. I didn't care at all what Chrissy was doing with her new love. Don't get me wrong, it still hurt when I stopped and thought about the fact that my wife was with another man. But I didn't think about it as much anymore. By the fifth session, I decided that I was going to go on the offensive. I thought that if I attacked Chrissy hard enough, she might decide to put an end to these useless sessions. I decided to tell her the most hurtful thing she had said to me, that I was too ugly to attract another woman. When asked if I had anything to say, I pounced on Chrissy. Chrissy, I've decided that not only are you completely selfish, but you're also a very ugly person, I said with venom. How dare you tell the man you supposedly love that he's an ugly middle-aged man that no woman would want? You have hurt me in a way that I am unlikely to ever get over. Oh my God, Ron, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I'm so ashamed that I even said that. If I could take it back, I would. I really do love you. Not so much as to give up your lover, I snapped back. Chrissy broke into uncontrollable sobs. No matter what I said, we could not calm Chrissy down. Eventually Ann announced the end of the session, but gave us a homework assignment to complete before the next one. I wasn't looking forward to it because I had already realized that these classes were a waste of time. The homework was to answer a number of questions. Some of them I understood, such as how was our relationship with our parents? How were things going with our sex life? Some questions made no sense to me, such as what are my favorite foods and drinks? What kind of car do I drive? But one question got me thinking. If I could change one thing, what would it be? I was working on this questionnaire the evening after the last session, but put it aside after reading this question. I wanted to give it some thought. The next day I finally wrote that I wanted to be a better husband so my wife wouldn't stop loving me. In the next class, we handed in our papers, but Ann didn't even look at them. Instead, she started by asking if we had any questions or anything we wanted to discuss. "I'd like to ask Chrissy a question," I said immediately. And nodded at me, and I turned to face my separated wife. "Chrissy, I don't see us accomplishing anything with these sessions. You keep making it clear that you're not going to leave your friend Bruce Hartman, and that leaves no chance of reconciliation. Why don't we just call it a day and file for divorce?" "How do you know his name?" Chrissy asked in shock. "That first time you came to visit the kids, I recognized his license plate number. After that, I had no trouble finding out his name. But it doesn't matter. I don't want to retaliate against him or even talk to him. I just don't care. I want to move on with my life." Chrissy looked at me with the saddest eyes I think I had ever seen. I hated to see her pain, and I wanted to go over and hug her. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything, so I continued. "I know your attorney isn't thrilled with the settlement I've proposed. Well, I've asked my attorney to suggest some alternatives. I'm willing to alternate every 2 weeks between staying in the house with the children. I also offer to pay you $1,500 a month in child support for 3 years. I looked at Chrissy, expecting a reaction, but all I saw was a terrible sadness. She had made it very clear to me that she wasn't going to stop seeing this guy, and I couldn't and wouldn't put up with my wife having sex with another man. I just couldn't understand how she could think I could live with that situation. It didn't matter at that point. I just wanted to leave. I decided to press on to put an end to this farce. "I know what you said about me was partly true. It hurt like hell when you said it, and I told you I didn't think I'd ever get over it. But as time went on, I realized that I had come to terms with it. Anyway, as you can see, I've been trying to clean up my act. I don't think I'm the person you thought so little of when you were dating Bruce. I also started dating. After our divorce, you can take care of your gentleman friend as much as you want. But I think it's time to put an end to it, if for no other reason, so you can start rebuilding a relationship with your children." With those words, Chrissy burst into tears and ran out of the room. And looked as stunned as I did. Finally, Ann pulled herself together and said that she wanted Chrissy alone for the next session and me alone for the last session. Sighing, I agreed. When Chrissy had dumped all that shit on me, I'd been furious and full of hate. But now, months after it had happened, I was just exhausted. I could see the pain all of this was causing not only to me, but to Chrissy, her parents, and most of all our children. I wanted it to stop. I was also no longer furious that Chrissy was fucking some guy. When I went to my last appointment with Ann, not only was I glad Chrissy wasn't there, but I was glad that this was the end of counseling. "Ron, I want to thank you for your stamina throughout these sessions," Ann began. "I know this whole situation has been incredibly painful for you. After seeing Chrissy last week, I think I finally understand what happened to your wife." Now I was sitting on the edge of my chair. Finally, maybe I would find out why Chrissy had decided to break up our marriage. "Remember the homework I gave you?" she asked. I only nodded. I had forgotten about it and decided it didn't matter much for this consultation. The way you both answered one particular question surprised me, and said, pulling 2 sheets of paper out of the folder. The question was, if you could change one thing, what would it be? "Do you remember him?" I nodded. "You replied that you wished you were a better husband so your wife wouldn't stop loving you." When Chrissy heard that, she broke down and cried harder than she ever had before. It took me quite a while to calm her down. I didn't know what to think, say, or do, so I just sat there. "Ron, your wife never stopped loving you." "Yeah, that's why she keeps sleeping with Bruce, because she loved me so much." And threw me a disapproving look, but then sighed. "Ron, what I learned about Chrissy was that she was going through a severe midlife crisis. As the children grew older, Chrissy felt that life was slipping away from her. She was, and I suspect always had been, a warm and caring person. At some point she found Bruce, who needed her terribly. She confused her desire to be young again with Bruce's terrible need for forgiveness for his wife's death for love. That doesn't change anything, and, I protested. She's still sleeping with Bruce. Actually, no, Ron. Really? This was news to me. Then why didn't Chrissy tell me? Anne sighed. I know it won't change how you feel right now, but you need to know the whole truth. Bruce left town the same day you told Chrissy you were going to start dating and wanted to get the divorce finalized soon. She thought she had already lost you. I thought about it, but Anne was right, it didn't change my mind. Too much had been said and done to go back. Now my life had run its course and I wanted to move forward. I would never be able to trust Chrissy again, and I didn't want to live like that. But on top of everything else, I wanted the kids to hopefully start bonding with their mother again. Sally's grades had dropped a lot since this whole mess had started, and I was sure she was still mad at her mother. Kyle had become moody and withdrawn and was behaving inappropriately at school. This was perhaps the worst consequence of Chrissy's actions. Kyle was no longer that happy and lucky kid. Ron handled it the best. He wasn't mean or moody. But every time his mother's name came up in conversation, he changed the subject. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe his reactions are worse than the two girls. I just don't know. One last thing, Ron, and said, pulling out a second sheet of paper. This is Chrissy's answer to the question about changing one thing. She wrote that if she could change one thing, it would be that she never dated Bruce Hartman. The divorce took place and, as agreed, Chrissy and I began living separately in the house. At first it was very formal and awkward. But then we started having dinner with the kids. And one evening Chrissy asked me if I wanted to spend the night. No, I replied with a chuckle, the bed in the spare room isn't that comfortable. I'll just go back to my apartment. That's not what I mean, she said with a shy smile. I want you to sleep in bed with me. It was overwhelming. But being a man, I wasn't going to pass up the chance to have sex. I don't know what Chrissy had been up to since Bruce left, but I had been entertaining a few girlfriends in my apartment. I wasn't in a serious relationship with any of them, but the benefits were great. I wish I could say that after that night we were a happily married couple again, but that didn't happen. Oh, I am happily married, but we haven't remarried. I spend more time at the house, and almost all of those visits are sleepovers. Gradually, Chrissy was able to rebuild a loving relationship with her children. Or should I say she restored a loving relationship with Sally and Kyle. No matter what Chrissy did, there was always distance between her and Ron. I would have thought Sally would hold a grudge, but she was the first to fully accept. Her mother's return. Chrissy has finally reconciled with her parents. However, like Ron, some coldness was felt in the relationship with her father. Anyway, on Sunday we had dinner there as a family, but that wasn't the case. Chrissy kept telling me how sorry she was that things had turned out that way. I finally told her to stop, that I forgave her. However, I also told her that I could never forget what had happened. One day Chrissy asked me if we could get married again. I told her that I just wanted things to stay the same, and then we'd see. Truth be told, I don't think we will ever get married again, and that makes me sad. I just wish Chrissy would think about the consequences of what she's doing. But maybe she wasn't capable of it. I guess it doesn't matter now. Before all of this happened, I thought I had answers to most of my questions, but now I feel like I don't even know what those questions are. Still, while I don't believe we will ever get married again, I have learned one thing: never say never. The issue of paternity raised in this story arises all too often when a mother is actively involved in one or more affairs. It is something every husband should be concerned about. In recent years, the courts have ruled that a father has only a limited amount of time to challenge the paternity of children who should belong to him. Increasingly, you read stories of husbands finding out years later that the children they thought were theirs are in fact not. To their credit, the vast majority of these fathers have chosen to continue to support and love these children even though they are not their flesh and blood. But what about the father who discovers that the children he supported are not his? Suppose he doesn't want to keep paying for them because these children are horrible people, possibly poisoned by their mother. After a while, the court says to the father, "That's too bad, but you have to keep paying for them." That's just wrong. The wife is the guilty party, and she gets rewarded. In contrast, the husband, who is the innocent party, is penalized. Yes, I know women will go into a rage and say that this would be unfair to the children. But for those who say that, I argue that they are wrong and I explain it below. This injustice has a solution. First of all, the laws must be changed. Husbands should be protected in such cases. At the same time, the children in such cases should also be protected. If the husband does not want to pay for children who do not belong to him, then he should not do so. If the wife is unable to provide for these children, the state should do so. However, to avoid this situation, DNA testing should be mandatory for all new children. This would not only confirm that the man is the biological father, but also alert parents to the many potential medical problems the child may face in the future. Currently, no such law exists. Therefore, every new father is required to take a DNA test every time his wife gives birth to another child.